He was born in Oakland, California, and grew up in Haifa, Israel. He received his PhD in History and Jewish Studies from New York University after holding Jess Schwartz Chair in Hebrew Culture at Arizona State University, and joined the faculty of UCLA in 2009 as Associate Professor in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures, as well as the Goldberg Chair in Israel Studies. His research focuses on the history of Zionism in Israel and on the varieties of Jewish nationalism. His book, Becoming Hebrew, The Creation of a Jewish National Culture in Ottoman Palestine, was published in 2008, and he's currently working on two parallel book projects: a study on the shifting imagery and symbolism of the sacred in the making of Zionism in Israeli culture, as well as a history of territorialism and Jewish territorialist organization. So please welcome Dr. Arieh Saposnik.
So there's a great deal in what Chaim and David said that I think is worth addressing, but I'll stick to what I wanted to talk about initially, and hopefully we'll have time to discuss this. As Corey mentioned, I study Zionism and Jewish nationalism, and I want to begin with something that sort of ties into that, because I think David asked the question of why is it, what is it at the foundation that has not allowed us to get to some kind of peaceful solution? I think that's a correct question. I agree with some of David's answer, disagree with some of it. We'll get there. But I think one of the answers is that we haven't really acknowledged that this is a conflict about identities and about pasts as much as it is about real estate and the present. And so let me just throw something out here. I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that linguists today estimate there are about 7,000 languages that human beings speak today. Once upon a time, before the age of colonies and empires, it's estimated there were about 20,000. We've gone from about 20,000 to about 7,000, so a significant decline. It's estimated that today, about, let me make sure I don't misquote my numbers here, every 2 weeks, one language dies. Every 2 weeks, a language dies. By the end of this quarter, another human language is dead. Okay? And so let's add to that within the next 3 generations of the 7,000 languages that exist today, at least half of them will be gone. So by the time your grandchildren are in school here, there will be half the number of human languages, and with those, human cultures, ways of being human. Okay? That's what it's about. Now, arguably, we could actually be very happy about this, right? We're all becoming, this is the counter Tower of Babel, right? We're all becoming one language, one culture. This is cosmopolitanism at its best, right? But I don't think very many of us actually will have that reaction when we hear these numbers. I can tell you that whenever I hear these numbers, I get depressed. Because what this is about the disappearance, the erasure of ways of being human. There are no abstract human beings. There are only particular human beings with particular languages and particular cultures and the ways in which they know how to construct their world and be human. Why is this relevant to the question of partition and the two-state solution? Because I think one piece of the puzzle that needs to be added in here, and it's a difficult one to add in fact, on many university campuses today, and that is the question of Zionism and the question, in fact, more broadly, of nationalism. Modern Zionism emerged in the late 19th century as out of a diagnosis that said Jewish culture is facing the same kind of fate. Jewish culture, and Jews physically for that matter, are facing the same kind of fate, whether by threats from without, an increasingly violent anti-Semitism that was making itself felt very acutely by European Jews by the late 19th century, or, I shouldn't say or really, and in a process of internal social and cultural disintegration. This was the Zionist diagnosis, right? That there was a threat from without, Jews were being attacked, and internally Jews were disintegrating socially and culturally. The prescription that Zionism gave was that there were two things, essentially, to boil many, many Zionist ideologies down into two lines, two prescriptions. One was that the necessary remedy to this process was for Jews to be present in Palestine, what had been known for centuries and centuries in Jewish discourse as the land of Israel. Okay? That was one necessary prescription, one necessary remedy. The other remedy, which became increasingly central over the course of Zionism's development, was that that presence in the land of Israel should take the form of a nation state. In other words, the diagnosis was that in the modern era, in the modern world, a world in which the map of the world is basically drawn according to nation states, what Jews need in order to be able to preserve themselves both physically and culturally was a nation state of their own, and the Zionist argument was that one place, Zionist argument after 1905 at least, that's a bit of history we won't get into at the moment, that the one place that could take place was in the land of Israel. So in other words, this was a claim, the Zionist claim, and this I think is important to stress here, the Zionist claim did two things. Number one, it tried to recast what had been one of the central characteristics of Jewish life for centuries, and that was some form of grappling with the relationship between Jews and the land of Israel. It took many different forms in different times and in different places, but some form of grappling with the relationship between Jewishness and the land of Israel was central to Judaism essentially since day one. And Zionism picks this up and says there's also a demand for a kind of human justice. This is a demand for a kind of justice, that Jews need a nation state as well. Now, this rested upon certain premises of modern nationalism generally, which again, it is very unfashionable today in the circles that I walk around in to say anything good about nationalism. Nationalism, of course, is based on these base instincts, and it's a source of war and strife and so forth, right? Well, I'm not so sure that that's entirely true. Sometimes that is true, but nationalism is also the demand by particular ethnic cultural groups for self-preservation and for the right to self-determination. In that regard, by the way, this is as true as it is of Zionism, it is also true of Palestinian nationalism. Both Zionism and Palestinian nationalism demand the right to self-preservation and self-determination of their particular ethnic cultural groups. What does this mean? The diagnosis that nationalism has, and certainly that Zionism has and Palestinian nationalism have as particular instances of nationalism, is that in order to allow for the full expression, the free expression of that group's culture, what they need is a nation state. What those groups need is their own nation state. Every poll we can point to suggests that the majority of Israelis, probably the majority of Jews, by the way, around the world, and the majority of Palestinians want a nation state of their own. So number one, the idea of the one-state solution, and whether in fact it is a solution is another question. In fact, it may be a solution, but I'm not sure it's a solution to this conflict. I can talk about what it may be a solution to in a little while. In any case, the one-state solution flies against the will of both peoples, of the vast majorities of both peoples. Right? Any notion of a one-state solution. Sometimes the one-state solution, I'll use that terminology, is couched in the notion that we have entered a post-national age. Right? Certainly in the 1990s, this was a popular idea that floated around. So far, I have to say, I have seen little evidence of the post-national age. And I have to say, and here I'll agree with Michael Walzer, the political philosopher, If indeed we have entered a post-national age, which might change the Zionist diagnosis and prescription, in fact, and we might have to reconsider at that point, well, perhaps France should begin by dismantling itself, or maybe Saudi Arabia, or I don't know, Germany, Russia. Maybe let's start. It's not entirely clear to me why the expectation is that Israel should be the first nation state to dismantle its very existence, which of course is what the one-state solution ultimately suggests. Let me add 2 minutes. Let me add further to this. I don't, how is the one-state solution usually formulated? Either in terms of a state of all its citizens, right? This is one of the formulations we hear, or a secular democratic state. Now, a state of all its citizens, in the same way that I was arguing earlier that there is no such thing as an abstract human being, I don't see anywhere a state of all its citizens, including the country that we are sitting in right now, which is probably the closest model that I can conceive of to that, right? It still has all sorts of national symbols and a national anthem, a flag. It has a national character. American nationalism is a strange animal, but it still has a national character. I don't know what a state of all its citizens would be without some kind of a national characteristic. About a minute to go. Let me say then, let me try and say a few concluding remarks here about what a two-state solution and a one-state solution might look like. The organizers asked us to address a few specific questions. I'm going to address a few of them very quickly. Okay? In other words, first one was, in a nutshell, what option, the one or the two-state option, is better for the Jewish people, Israelis, and Palestinians? Well, number one, as I just indicated, certainly for Jews, Israelis, and Palestinians, what the vast majorities of them want is a nation state to act as the vehicle of their ethnic and cultural identities. Clearly, that is a desirable solution for them. The one-state model, I can think of examples. Lebanon in the 70s and 80s, Balkans in the 90s. I don't think those are very good options for either Israelis or Palestinians. So I'm not sure I would go that way. The second question that we were asked to address was the question of viability. Let me say a quick word about viability, because one of the arguments that has been often made is that the two-state solution is no longer viable, therefore we need a one-state solution. Let me quickly say, yes, there are major issues of viability with the two-state solution. That does not imply that a one-state solution is either desirable or viable. Ultimately, and here I really will finish up, the two-state solution, I would say, is probably a lousy solution, but it is a much less lousy solution than the one-state dissolution, which is really what would result should there be some attempt at this one state. And let me have one final word. This is really my final word. In fact, therefore, the one-state solution is not a solution to the conflict. It is a solution to the problem of the existence of the Jewish state.